And we are live. Welcome to another episode of Unscripted. And I have the great pleasure to introduce Dr. Chase Cunningham. Thanks very much for rejoining me again on this show. How are
Yeah,
you?
well, thanks for having me. And I didn't realize that we were growing our beards to match each other. So,
I think it's a growing trend. I think post-COVID, people just left it on.
yeah, it's like, why bother? Maybe
And it's,
maybe I'll shave mine off now that everybody's growing one. I don't know.
it's like one of those things you either love it or you hate it. There's never indifference about beards. So, and I guess it's just another topic for another conversation at some point. But first and foremost, let me say, and I've said that in our previous episode, I just can't believe how productive you are. And it's a compliment.
I don't like
that
to be bored.
because you have a lot of things running in parallel. Like you're running you have family, you're full-time employed, you're a consultant, you're an advisor, you're an author, and so on and so on. And you find time to come on to my show.
Yeah, talking with good people is more important than anything else.
And that's what kind of the segue for the topic today about your new book. But before we jump into that, just to set the stage for anybody who is not familiar with what you've done in the past, and then maybe set the stage of provide you authority to write this book, because it's very important as well. And then maybe just run us through a quick bio in terms of what you've done.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a retired Navy chief. Did a bunch of my work in the military, working for three letters and whatnot. I was an analyst at Forrester Research for a number of years. I wrote the curriculum that the DoD uses for computer network exploitation. I've got 6 patents. This is book number 7. I'm currently the VP of Security Market Research at G2. And then on top of that, I do advise the federal government on a pro bono basis around cybersecurity strategy and zero trust. So like you said, I try and stay busy, but I've been lucky enough to be engaged in a lot of different places.
I think you adopted like Schwarzenegger mantra of sleeping a little faster.
There's only so many hours in the day, so I get up and do your thing.
Let me ask you this, and it's a segue question. Are books a thing these days? It seems like the population is still watching TikToks and everything is digested into bit size information. And then you go ahead and you pack a lot of things into a pretty lengthy book. It has chapters, it has all this bunch of information that somebody needs to digest. So talk to me about the need for that as well. Books are not going away, but there's also an audience who just listens to book, like an audio version, or read the Cliff Notes.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of tools out there that provides you that in an audio format. Like you can listen to a whole book in 10 minutes kind of thing.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. So yeah, I'm an audiobook listener actually. So I'm actually, for this book, I am currently working on making the Audible version, because the publisher was like, oh, we have people that'll do that. And I was like, no, it's my book. Like, I'm going to do the Audible version. So working on that. But I personally, I fought tooth and nail not to be an audiobook guy. But once I started like listening to books at the gym, I was like, this is great. Now, I still think that there's a lot of value in sitting down sometimes and actually decompressing and reading something. Your brain just can't focus on anything other than what's in front of you, which is good. But yeah, to your point, like we're at a stage where you've got kind of two sides of the generational coin on books. You've got the younger folks that want it in 8 seconds and they want it digestible and they're not going to sit down and read a book. And then you have the folks that are in kind of years in my generation that still actually, most of them will say they actually get some comfort out of reading a book and having it in their hand. So it's both ways. The other thing, just for anybody that thinks they want to write a book, know this: you're not going to make a lot of money writing a book. It's, if you want to write it, it's literally just basically say, I'm going to give up my time and money, because you're not going to make money on it. But it's it's if you want to contribute, I think it's one of the good ways to contribute.
Yeah, and there's a lot of ghostwriters as well. And you beat me to it. Like I was about to ask you whether you're going to be reading your own book and how was that experience? Because I don't know. I imagine it's not fiction, so you don't have to run around with coconut halves and pretend that somebody's.
Yeah. No,
But I'm sure it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, but luckily now with like Fiverr's who I use, so I just go and find an audio engineer on Fiverr, and basically I contract with them and go, look, how much is it going to cost me for you to edit my reading? And it's not cost prohibitive, so it's a good way to do it. You could do it yourself, but it's a lot of work to do all that. So I would encourage people, if they want to do that, go through Fiverr.
Have you considered creating a deep fake of your voice and just let the AI do that?
I did consider that. The thought crossed my mind. I've been playing around with it, but I haven't found. I think 11 Labs is probably the best voice deep fake thing I've run across, and even theirs, I tried to do like a chapter with it, and it was just clippy enough that you noticed it.
Yeah, it's monotonous, and maybe potentially it would be good for maybe short snippets, so you can create some sort of short TikTok videos with potentially Vangelis music in the background and a video of turbulent water on the ocean kind of thing, and some quotes, because I think that would be like very powerful. There's probably some quotation from the book as well.
I'm sure there's some marketers out there that are way better at this than I am that'll tell me do this and do that, and okay, sure. Yeah, it's just one of these things too where Wiley's a great publisher, but once you publish a book, like the publisher kind of goes, here's your book, go sell it, and you're like, oh, okay.
So Dr. Cunningham, so the title of the book is How Not to Lead, in lessons every manager can learn from. So let me again step back, and I'd like to have a bit of conversational unscripted questions here. Is leading even a thing these days? Yes, there are still companies out there, but a lot of times I feel that people just have to lead themselves. There's a lot of businesses of one person. Everything is outsourced to third parties. The traditional organizational structure of a manager leading others have gradually diminished. Do we still lead? Is there still something that's needed?
I think it's definitely needed, but to your point, like the leadership structure is not what it used to be. And that's actually something I referenced a lot while I was writing this, was there's kind of tenets of leadership that you should carry with you, and they should follow you in, I think, everything from your daily life, even with your family and whatever, to how you interact with people. And to your point, like I'm a one-man show, like I'm a contractor, I do all the work on myself, but I still feel like when I'm in a position where I'm working with others, that there's a right way to quote unquote lead. And it's valuable to have an understanding of the way that's best for everybody involved. And it just, there's a lot of nuances, especially like you're saying, in this new way of doing business. And it's very interesting, especially for those of us that are ex-military, because in the military, if you've got rank, you just kick down doors and flip tables and get things done because you're the loudest in the room. You can't do that in the regular corporate world. And it requires a change in thinking and a change in the approach. And admittedly, when I medically retired out of the Navy, I was one of the worst at I used to get so mad at people when I was trying to get them to do things the way that I was used to. And it's just not a good way to do business.
Yeah, and it's part of the challenges. And I've spoken to a lot of veterans as well as in the transition into civilian life, and that's one of the challenges as well, is to understand that the structure no longer apply. Is a different structure. So in terms of the kind of leadership component, right? While we're having this conversation, maybe like I would love to touch upon the fact that maybe that this is one of the missing components that AI would not necessarily replace. because I'm always thinking about the new generation, right? Our kids, like what skill set would they need in order for them to be successful? And I think it would be a while for AI to be able to replicate good leadership skills. We've seen at least some advertisement and notices about AI taking over a company and as a CEO, and now the company is 200% more profitable. I don't know if that's the case. I don't even know what's it's applicable or what were the causes. But coming back to my original question, I would like to touch upon the fact that the leadership skills is something that is not easily replaced, and then also carries quite a bit of dividends, right? To have this skill set.
Yeah, this is soft skills are, I think, becoming more important nowadays, especially in a space where the technology is where it is. And it's also crazy too when you really think about it. In the new way of working, you actually are dealing with people at other levels and at different points in their lives more than you were in the last sort of generation, right? Like you used to go to the office 8 in the morning and leave at 4, 9 to 5, whatever. And that 8-hour window, that's all you saw of people. Now I'm on Slack, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on whatever. I'm talking to folks at midnight or 10 in the afternoon or whatever else. We're constantly in communication, and you've got to be able to deal with the fact that you're also impacted by people's personal lives, the stuff that's going on with them, because it all filters into the space. And if you're in a space where AI is going to start leading, I think that you're running a really big risk of letting the machines run things without the human sort of considerations that you need. Like I can use AI for a whole lot of stuff. I can use large language models for many different applications. But at the end of the day, especially in business, I need to have a person in there somewhere that's going to be the one who is accountable and who's going to drive change and make sure that things are on the up and up. There's no AI for integrity, as far as I know.
Or empathy, for that matter.
Or empathy, yeah.
At least not yet. Or depends on what you like. What you enter in by design. I'm sure you can design what empathy looks like, potentially, and then trying to train the model to act that way. But let me ask you this: so, what kind of leadership? And we dive into the topics. What kind of leadership misconceptions, specifically, the book is addressing?
Yeah, so the whole crux of this book was like you were talking about earlier. Like I read a lot or I listen to a lot of books, and I usually focus on business and self-help and those types of things because I just accept that I'm a sucky person and I can always get better. But last year when I was going through a lot of those books, especially in the business world, especially in tech, I didn't find anything that was really about basically what not to do. There was lots of things about how to be an amazing leader and win $100 million deals and all the rally around the fire, kumbaya crap that people talk about. But I didn't find anything where it was like, look, if you do this, you are being detrimental to the organization. You're hurting your people. You're going to bring things down. And fortunately or unfortunately, in my past, being an analyst and other in the military and whatever, I've worked with a bunch of jackasses. So I took a lot of those stories of the people that I saw that did things wrong and turned it into this book. So if you're looking for a book on, like the title says, how not to lead, those are the takeaways you want, is don't be that person that's in this book.
And have you taken some of these concepts from the fact that you also known for is Dr. Zero Trust, meaning that as cybersecurity, a lot of the concepts are, for example, let's block everything that's bad, and that will leave us to good. And it's similar. And again, I'm trying to connect the dots here.
No,
maybe
you're
potentially
not wrong.
There's maybe something there about.
Well, and I told a story in this book. Everybody thinks about Steve Jobs as the creator of the iPhone or whatever else, but there's a really interesting thing he did when he came back to Apple that was not a technology thing. He looked at all of the things that Apple was doing, and I think at one time they had 40-something product lines, and he was going, there's no way that we can deliver on this and actually have quality. And he literally went up on a whiteboard and wrote out on a grid, these are the 4 things that we're delivering. And he said everything else as of this moment is discontinued. And if you're Apple, can you imagine shutting off like 36 product lines? But because he did that, we now have the iPhone and iWatch and all these other things. So it's one of those deals of, if you know what not to do because there's not value to it, like you said, and I do the other things, logic, right? Even maybe mathematically, it dictates there's got to be success there.
And isn't it a little tougher though to sell the idea, because a lot of people just want to just give me the net, tell me the top 10 things I need to do that will make me successful. I don't want to deal with it, the all this other stuff. Like I don't even want to know about it. And also, are you risking the fact that maybe potentially people reading about what not to do, they're almost like the diversion to actually doing these things? And I'll give you an example. Some people are saying when you're practicing for an exam, you should not be doing multiple choice in a way that you're trying to answer and find out what the correct answer is. And then because what happened is you potentially risk the fact that you are going to answer wrong. And even though if you're going to look up the right answer, it's still the wrong answer will be etched in your mind. And next time you're going to answer, you're going to answer wrong again. So I know it's a long-winded question, but what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, there's always the concern about the introduction of theory into people's approaches to problems. And if it's one of those things, like you said, if I tell you subliminally not to do this, a lot of folks might gravitate towards doing that thing I'm telling them not to do. It is something to be aware of, because I think all of us do that to some degree. But the reality of where this space, in my opinion, needs to go is we need more people that are in leadership positions that are willing to take a look at what's not working and figure out better ways to do that, because we have too much opportunity to do. I think digital security and being online, I think that is a fundamental human right now. And every time that we don't solve this problem, we're putting people in a potentially risky, compromising position. And if we don't approach the problem differently, we're never going to get any better. And sometimes to approach the problem differently, you have to really step back and look and be like, look, this just isn't the way to do this. How else can I do it that would be better? And like you said, it's also easier to not actually implement real change. No one likes to be uncomfortable. No one likes to look in the mirror and go, you know what, I suck. But that's how you begin to get better, in my opinion. Realize that there's flaws and there's failures and there's wrong, and then work to do better.
Yeah, rule number one, you got to admit there's a problem. Or step number one. You, in your book, you also cover the idea of the role of trust and respect in the role of leadership. And those are such a big items, like just the definition of that. Maybe we can kind of go through that, because it probably means different things to different people. And then it's something that's almost so fragile to me, just even looking at it. It's something that probably takes a long time to build and then seconds to destroy, like in anything in life. And I don't know, maybe you can cover in a nutshell, what did you mean by that particular definition?
Yeah, so I did some research for this, and I did some polls and got a bunch of feedback from people, because I don't ever want to make decisions based on my own thinking. I want somebody else to vector that. And what I found out was that there's a triangle of things you need to be an effective leader, right? Respect, trust, and the other one that you should value is time. And most people don't think about time in that context. And what I mean by that is, if you look at what we do in this space, in technology and cyber specifically, there's a lot of times where there's events going on, there's work to be done, whatever else. And it's usually what I found, leadership's willing to steal people's time to make things happen. And when you do that, you actually affect the equation around the level of respect that they're going to give you, and that they trust that you're not going to waste their time. Because there's only one commodity that I'll never, ever be able to make more of. Like every second that you waste of my time on earth, I can't ever get it back. I can make more money, I can find more people, I can whatever. But if you take my time, you're affecting my ability to basically exist the way that I want to exist. And that will affect the ways that I think about you as a leader, especially in the context of respect and trust.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, Dr. Cunningham, the fact is, as you grow older, you tend to appreciate time more and more, and how valuable that is. I think when you're younger, you just think you have all the time in the world, and it's abundant, and then potentially it's not. Maybe even realistically, maybe it's not worth as much. Maybe you just advance in your career and so on. So, but as you grow older and you get more responsibility and experience, you realize that it's just as you described that time is super valuable, and people don't emphasize that enough. So for people reading the book and potentially recognizing their mistakes, and what practical measures can they take immediately, like just take whatever the concepts are and apply that to be more successful?
Yeah. One thing that I think is really valuable is I talk in the book about the two the two lenses you need to look through, which is a telescope and a mirror. And the one that I think is probably most important is looking in the mirror and basically going, you know what, here's where I could do better. Here's where I know that there's a fail. Here's where there's a way for myself to improve. And to me, in my own life, like I try and apply it from everything I do all the way up. Like you talked about, I like to hustle and work a lot. I always know that there's a way that I could do that better or more effectively, but it's a balance. And the other side is that telescope of being able to look way out in the future and know where you're wanting to go and then work your way backwards from that. A lot of times what we find is people, they look a little bit further down the road and they try and plot and plan to get towards 6 months out, whatever. If you can, especially if you're in a leadership position, use the telescope and look off into space and figure out where you want to go and then start working your way backwards from that, because that's how you plot success.
Yeah, and I like those examples because people can relate and conceptualize, because we're talking about items that are very hard to grasp. So it's nice to have some sort of analogy or something that we can. You have experience in the military and now in the tech sector, cybersecurity, and so on. You know, I come from that background as well. Any particular differences, for example, for the tech industry versus non-tech, or like maybe brick and mortar or some other industries, that in terms of the lessons learned and the takeaways for the book?
Yeah, I think tech is really interesting compared to the other sort of verticals that are there, like banking and healthcare and whatever, because tech is one where the meritocracy is actually constantly changing and shifting. You know, you can be okay at something, and because tech evolves, you can be better at something based on using new technology, which is difficult when you actually consider that. Like, I might not be great at this particular job or role right now, and then some new piece of software comes along, and all of a sudden I'm as good as somebody else that was doing this job. You don't see that in healthcare or whatever else. If you learn to be a really good cardiothoracic surgeon, you're probably going to be a really good cardiothoracic surgeon. You're not all of a sudden going to change and move into orthopedics. It's just where you're there. We have much more opportunity for dynamism and career progression, I think, in tech. And then the other piece that's interesting to me too is you're more deeply entrenched in your employees' lives, I think, in tech than you are in other spaces, because we are so connected and because we're people that are used to communicating all the time for everything. It's not that way in other spaces. Like my wife's a nurse. When she's done at work, she's done at work and she's home. And they're not talking about stuff. They're not slacking. They're not whatever. Me, where I am talking to people till the day is done. So you're engaged. I know about people's kids. I know about if they wrecked their car. I know about if they've got money troubles. And if I asked her that, she'd be like, I have no idea. I left work at 4. It is what it is.
Do you feel that potentially the leadership style is the secret sauce that differentiates between startups that do really well versus tech startups that do really well versus tech startups that don't succeed as much?
Yeah, it's funny. I think there was a documentary that was done about like the WeWork stuff. and the WeWork founder, he was an interesting dude, but he shouldn't have been leading a company that was worth what it was worth. And it basically wound up gutting the company over time. And that with a lot of companies where, and I talk about that in one of the chapters, as far as there's people that built really good technology that just happen to be founders. That doesn't mean that they should be CEOs and leaders. And a lot of times in tech, the VCs and the investors and whatever, they'll want to keep the founders as the leadership. That's not often the right decision. A lot of times those people literally don't want to do that job, but they get stuck there, and it just becomes problematic for the whole organization.
Yeah. Or potentially they don't want to let go. They've seen that as well, where they just want to stick around and they're enamored by the titles.
I'm a CEO. Okay, great.
Or president.
That and $1 will buy you a Coke.
You already mentioned specifically one of your experiences that kind of shaped who you are in terms of the work you've done and so on, and potentially has been triggered for this book. Anything else personally you can share that maybe from the book, maybe something outside, something like a scoop that you haven't shared so far? That is,
I think what's continually occurring to me is the things that we think that we understand, they change so much faster now, and I'm constantly amazed at the level of speed of what is taking place just in front of us all the time, every day. And for trying to run a business and work with clients and run a family and all these other things, I honestly have a genuine concern. It keeps me up at night sometimes that the ball rolling down the hill, the rock, the stone, like it's rolling ever faster. And it's not anything to do with the fact that I'm getting older. It's just that the speed of everything is going so much faster. I am concerned for the future of these generations coming. What's it going to look like in the future? Because ultimately you get to that point of no return. And is that point of no return around the corner, or is it 50 years out?
Yeah, so I concur. I think that there's definitely something to be said about the velocity of everything. I don't know if that's you ask somebody who was living in the early 1900s how I think they will basically die of exposure, mental exposure, if they lived today within a week. Just the amount of just to absorb, it's incredible.
Yeah, it's crazy too, the way that we're seeing technology affect the physiology of humans. I've been doing a bunch of reading on like the dopamine hits and those types of things that go on with apps and whatever.
And the psyche as well.
Yeah, it's crazy to think my kids, I can see it happening. What's going to happen to grandkids if I have any of those?
Yeah.
It just is. It's a problem that I don't have a lot of things that actually legit worry me, but this one does.
Yeah, and it's even the dot connecting like this relationship between people, among people. I think it's very different today. I think we see less and less empathy. People hide behind the digital communications, and in general, you can see that there's less of almost like collective common sense.
Yeah, I say everyone's worried about artificial intelligence. I'm worried about natural stupidity. Yeah.
I would say, Chase, like so that it sink in for 10 seconds and just describe. Maybe a T-shirt is also in order.
Yeah,
there's all these things. I gotta make T-shirts for the audience and have those on sale because it's well worthwhile. And we digress here, but let me ask you this. You talk also specifically about the importance of feedback and how it relates to the learning process. And like everything is iterative process, meaning that it's not enough to action reaction. You got to figure out, go back and see what were the impact and so on. So talk to me about the whole notion of getting feedback and the process of doing that, and doing that in a way that's not obtrusive almost. Because I can tell you, I'm sick and tired of every little thing. I don't understand why they have all this fireworks or whatever. I think it's a movement, maybe.
I don't
I mean,
know.
I'm gonna
It's
try to
cool though.
replicate that. It is cool, but I don't know if it matches what I'm saying, which is AI fail. Coming back to the train of thoughts, but everything now, especially in tech, is big on feedback. Meaning that for everything you get like a survey. You gotta fill in and click and I don't know. Sometimes you find that it's intrusive, and then also I would also claim that potentially the results are skewed because certain people just don't even respond to these. So maybe you get a certain response from the certain type of people that do respond to. So maybe there's a skew result. But I digress. Again, it's how do you create that feedback loop that it's beneficial to creating that positive reinforcement and positive change
Yeah, I think
in lessons
I
learned.
think it's a misnomer that folks think feedback has to be positive all the time. We could live in a world where we get participation trophies and everyone's worried about hurting everybody's feelings all the time. But honestly, if you're not being truthful with someone, can you actually expect them to make a change? Do you think they're going to do anything differently if you're just feeding their ego? And it doesn't mean that you have to be a jerk. It doesn't mean that you have to try and like intentionally hurt someone's feelings. However, you'll find in the feedback loop that if you sit down with somebody and look them right in the eyes and say, look, this is what the deal is. Here's the sort of facts and data to back up my perception, and et cetera, et cetera. Oh, and by the way, I think there's a way that we can work on this together and get better. You'll get that positive feedback you're looking for. It's actually, and there's studies that have proven it's actually detrimental to an organization's growth and to a person's growth to constantly, continually give them nothing but niceties and flowers or whatever else. There's value to being true and honest with people. And if,
Yeah, but Chase, sometimes it's not rewarded in an
oh
organization. I can
no,
tell you
there's
this,
punishment
certain
for it.
organizations.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you watch the Lego movie where everything is wonderful,
Everything is
I
awesome.
some
Yeah.
everything is awesome. Yeah, exactly. So I think if you some organizations almost that's the mantra. Everybody 360, they report how everything wonderful to up to the management, and then they report how or they discuss how everything is wonderful with the people that reports to them. So everybody like kumbaya, and nobody, the person that kind of raised their hand and say, "Hey, I think I have something not as pleasant to say," we potentially risk has some associated risk with that.
And if that's the case, if you, in my experience, if that's the case and you know that's the culture of the company, then my advice would be get an outside contractor or someone that is outside the organization that can actually give you that real honest feedback and that is not going to worry about losing their job by telling you the truth. That there's insight and value there. And then interestingly too, those people typically are well versed at ways to craft that story so that it is not offensive, but it's still helpful.
Okay. Yeah, that makes total sense. Let me ask you this, and I have two more questions that just come to mind. And I apologize because every time you answer, I come up with another question. And you've done quite well for, again, this conversation is completely unscripted. Dr. Cunningham did not have any preconceived
Nope.
notion in terms of what we're going to be talking about whatsoever. Do you think that some of these principles you describe in your book, How Not to Lead, would evolve over time with the kind of the changing of the more modern workplace and maybe into the future?
I really hope that they do because the majority of what I've got in here is stuff that is, like you say, it's a book, right? It's a snapshot in time. I would hope that as we get better and evolve at the business level, at the organizational level, at the human level, that a lot of what I wrote about in here becomes conversational, maybe not something that people look at as written in stone. Because if the majority of what I'm writing about is ways people do things wrong, logically we should get better over time, and this should become, nothing more than something to put your coffee cup on, and I'm perfectly okay with that. That means that there's improvement.
And let's kind of part ways with potentially just maybe one principle, one takeaway If somebody doesn't have the time to do the cliff notes, but wants to, and listening to this and like to grab one takeaway from this book and from your research, what would that be?
Yeah, it's one of the best life lessons I ever learned, and it's you deserve what you tolerate. And most people don't think about things like that. If you allow people to disrespect you, you deserve it, and you're going to get it. That's the last piece of that phrase is you deserve what you tolerate, and you get what you expect. If you're a leader and you don't lead, expect for people to run ragged over you. If you're in charge and you don't actually impose your kind of will, expect people to impose theirs upon you. And you should expect that. The very nature of humans is that we are constantly trying to find a leg up on every situation that we're in, every person that we interact with. It's not a nefarious thing. It just is how we've made it to this point in our evolutionary history. So if I was going to say to anyone, the one thing I'd want you to know, you deserve what you tolerate. And if you're willing to tolerate it, expect that it's going to continue.
I absolutely love that. And I have one last question. If you had the rights for the movie, How Not to Lead, who would you pick as the main character?
Oh, gosh.
Which actor? Will Ferrell?
Yeah, that would be a good one. I don't know. I've always been a fan of Clive Owen. He's a pretty good, yeah. Or Ray.
He's awesome.
Yeah, Ray Fiennes. I've always thought he was pretty cool.
Awesome. It's been so pleasurable. Like I really enjoyed the conversation today. It was awesome. And again, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. And I'm expecting nothing else but maybe more books in the series. Maybe like part 2 and maybe part 3 of this. But until then, what's the easiest way to get hold of the copy of the book and then reach out to you? Do you send out signed autographs?
I'm sending you one.
Copies?
So yeah, you've got one on the way. I put it in the mail actually today, so it'll hopefully be there pretty soon. Just y'all, if you're listening to this, David, he'll give you his address for a free book. But yeah, you can get it on Amazon. You can get it Kindle. Soon it'll be up on Audible. Wiley is the publisher. And if you need to get a hold of me, I'm always on LinkedIn, or you can look me up and just ping me through DMs and I'll get back to you.
Super. Dr. Chase Cunningham, thank you very much for joining me today. Thanks to all for joined, and looking forward to seeing you in the next episode. Until then, stay safe. Online is all fine, and just go ahead and go read that book. I'm sure it has a lot of golden nuggets you can use. Thanks again.
Thank you.